Week 1 done, and things are still not looking great. The first week has been filled with a lot of ups and a lot of downs, and most of them don't seem to matter. So let's talk about where the polls are and why the polls are the way that they are right now. According to 338 Canada's projections, the Liberals are set to win a majority government. Now, this is not surprising at all in terms of the poll results, and the polls, as you can see, are not looking very good for the Conservatives right now. Now, most of these in the first week, as you can see, are from Liaison and Main Street, and the reason for that is because they are doing daily rolling polls, so they will have a 3-day poll that encompasses a large enough sample size to have a good amount, and every day they will add a new sample size, a percentage of that, and drop off the oldest one. And so it keeps a continuous rolling poll in order to try and find some trends. Now, these polls are typically really bad in non-election periods, but in election periods, they actually can be fairly good. Now, if we take a look at Main Street, their number for the Liberals actually decreased throughout the week, and the gap has shrunk to only, now it says 2 points, but the actual percentages here, if you look at the Main Street data itself, it is 1.5 points. Now, Ecos, just ignore Ecos. They are so far off of everyone else, and they have been forever, that there's not even a point in looking at them. Now, if you want this in graph form, you can take a look here. Here, the Liberals had a pretty high to start the campaign. The Conservatives have been pretty even, rising ever so slightly. The Liberals have dropped ever so slightly. Really, you can just look at the bottom here with the NDP. The NDP has ever so slightly recovered, which is why the Liberals have dropped a little bit. Now, I want to share a statistic with you. This election has been one of the, if not the most unique elections in Canadian history. And the reason I say that is because the drop that we're seeing the NDP at right now is borderline unprecedented. We have never seen the left in Canada unify like this in the last century. There have been times where the NDP has gone down, but the left hasn't unified, where a lot of the center left have actually migrated over to the Conservatives in a lot of instances. That happened in the 90s a lot, where the NDP was really low, but the left wasn't unified. This is a rare instance where the left is actually unified. And to put that into context, I want you to look at this. The 1926 election. This election was the last time that the Conservatives got 37% plus of the vote and did not form government. It has been almost 100 years since the Conservatives, polling at their current polling rate at 37%, got that amount of vote and did not win the election. That is how unprecedented this election is. If you want, I will link this election result thing in the description because it is a very interesting chart to look at. You can try and find some similarities between now and other elections. And finally, on the polling front, I do want to bring up this tweet because I think it is very important to differentiate polls from models. Poll is a sample collected that includes data of who people are voting for. Historically, polls have been very accurate in Canada. Of course, they are not flawless. They will miss. And individual polls are not what is accurate. It's the aggregate. The aggregate of polls, whether they be from 338 or from Eric Grenier's model or whatever, the aggregate of polls has been extremely accurate in Canada, and it has been for a while. Models are very different, and this is what we saw in the the Ontario 2025 election. Canadian Bagel, who I'd recommend you follow because he does a lot of good polling content on Twitter, says models are probably going to be systematically wrong if the election turns out like the polls suggest. There is no way the NDP loses 2/3 of their vote share and it's just proportional swing. Now, this is a good point because if you look at the Ontario election, the NDP had a very strange incumbent effect where their incumbent MPs held on to most, if not all of their seats, yet their vote percentage dropped quite considerably. So there could be a chance here where the NDP actually holds on to a lot of the seats that they have now, but their vote percentage drops nationally because it's only an incumbent effect. And models really can't predict that, which is why when you look at a model like 338 Canada, where they have the NDP with only 6 seats, it could actually increase more than that. We just don't know. Now, what that means in terms of the election outcome is that it's possible the Liberals fail to get a majority because of NDP incumbency, but they would still win the most seats. Right now, for the Liberals to not win the most seats, the polls need to change significantly. Now, if you're curious, what does it take for the Conservatives to win a majority or a minority? Well, it would essentially mean that the vote share needs to flip. This needs to flip, which is not impossible. If the Liberals were to drop a few points, like say 2 or 3, and give that to the NDP, and the Conservatives were to rise a few points, give that 2 or 3, then it's very possible for the Conservatives to come out with a plurality. But it's unlikely at this point unless something major happens, and we'll talk about some of the major things that have happened this week. Now, of course, Trump has been a major talking point this election, and that's for good reason. But when you look at the data of what Canadians are voting on, he's not actually the biggest issue. Now, more people here are saying that they are going to vote for a party that is able to reduce the cost of living than they are to vote for a party that is best to deal with Trump. But at the same time, people are more likely to vote for Trump than a party that's going to give a change in direction. But more people are going to want to vote for a political party that will grow the economy than one that will handle Trump. So Trump is a very important factor. He's a top 3 factor, but he does sit behind wanting to reduce the cost of living and to grow the economy. And when we take a look at who favors what, we can see that the Conservatives have a huge lead in growing the economy and reducing your cost of living. And this right here, what you're seeing here, is a result of older people. Now, this is a slightly different kind of poll, where people are asked, is Canada the greatest country in the world, or Canada is not the greatest country in the world? And the percentage of people that are 60 and over that believe Canada is the greatest country in the world is huge. So when someone like Trump is threatening the very existence of Canada with annexation, then that is going to stir up a lot of pushback and a lot of anger. And that anger is being driven right to the Liberal Party because they are simply not right-wing. Even if the Conservatives are nothing like the American Conservatives, it doesn't matter because they have a right-wing badge next to their name, and that's too close of an association. Now, as we can also see on the other end, young people very much do not feel this way because they are having trouble with costs of living. Again, as we can see from these graphs. So we are currently, based on the cost of living, setting up a very, very stark divide between the young and the old. But the problem that the Conservatives face is that the people that vote the most are the old people. Older people vote in far larger numbers than younger people. Even in the young movement of 2015, the share of young people that actually went out to vote was still less than 50%, if I remember correctly, or it might have been right at 50%. Whereas the share of older people was in the 60s and 70s. And in this election, we have data showing that it's potentially going to be even higher for the older people because they're so pissed off. And we don't have that same data for younger people to come out and vote. It's higher, but it's not anywhere near as high as the older people. And so when you look at something like this, it becomes a bit worrying for the Conservatives. Carney, for the first time, which is actually crazy because he's been PM for a number of weeks at this point, finally spoke to Trump a couple of days ago. And as we can see, Trump dropped a lot of the 51st state and the governor of Canada, whether jokes or threats or whatever you want to believe, and in fact just stuck to typical boring politics, which is generally a good thing, but for the Conservatives is a bad thing, because now Carney has a way to say, look, I'm dealing with Trump. Now, what has caused Trump to change this? Who knows? Maybe it's just because he actually talked to him and he found out he doesn't speak like Trudeau, even though his policies are very much like Trudeau. Who knows? Trump is not really that smart. The tariffs are really ruining everything, and he just can't see it. So we'll have to wait and see if Trump changes his tune. It's entirely possible that Trump once again kicks up the 51st state and the governor jokes or threats or whatever, and we're right back to where we were at the beginning. But this kind of message that you can see here will very likely embolden the old people to stick with Carney. With Trump out of the way, because you have to talk about it in this election, let's talk about some of the other stuff. This was an absolutely wild story that came out a few days ago, and I'm just going to read this here. To everyone here, you can claim the $1 million bounty if you bring him to Toronto's Chinese consulate, Chiang reportedly told Ming Piao, a Chinese language media, during an ethnic media conference in January. Now, what he's saying here, bring him to Toronto's Chinese consulate, is a conservative candidate that Chiang is going up against in order to turn him in and have him arrested by the Chinese government. A liberal MP, because he is running for re-election, encouraged people in a crowd to kidnap an opponent, a political opponent, and turn him over to the Chinese in Canada to have him be arrested. That is unacceptable, is too low of a word to use here. It is wild. And guess what? This same guy is the guy that introduced G4 and G46 and C21. I wonder who he sides with. But don't worry, guys. He'll get dropped. Oh, wait. No, he won't. Right now, Paul Chiang has not stepped down as the candidate in this riding, nor has Mark Carney said anything about this. He has been completely silent on this, which is unacceptable in every single way. Now, will this have an effect on the polls? I actually suspect this one might. We'll have to wait a few days to see it materialize, but this is quite a bad look on Carney for not doing anything about it. It's one thing for this to happen within a few hours and Carney not say anything, but for him to not say anything after a few days about a comment that is this awful is unacceptable. And the fact that he's still in this riding is ridiculous. Now, moving on from that, we have Carney's blunders. Now, Carney has really struggled with French. In an answer that he was answering in French to a reporter, he gave up halfway through and just started speaking English. Earlier in the week, which I don't have a tweet of this, I'm sorry, he mispronounced Natalie Prevost's name, who is the, quote, star anti-gun candidate in Quebec. Mispronounced her name, but then also did not remember what shooting she was a part of, saying that she was part of the Concordia shooting or Concord shooting or whatever when it was the Polytechnique shooting. And this is a very, very, very big error simply for the fact that that shooting is the reason that Quebec is so anti-gun today. It is such a big deal in Quebec. And if you're wondering how he could screw that up, it's probably because he wasn't in Canada at the time. He was in Oxford working on his PhD. At least that's what I can discern from the time spent at university's page on Wikipedia. Maybe he was in Montreal or in Canada during that specific time, but if he was, that makes it more unacceptable. I think the reality is he wasn't in Canada and he missed it. And he's only just catching up on it because he has to. But will these have an effect on the polls? So far, they haven't. Right now, the Quebec vote is still very heavily with Carney, which is still unbelievable to me. I think if we're going to see a vote shift in Quebec, it's going to come with the French debates. And we've seen that in the last few elections where once the Liberal candidate, even if it was Trudeau, speaks at the debates, the Bloc starts rising after the French debate, just because the Bloc very often has really good one-on-one performances or debate performances, and then people in Quebec are reminded of why they voted for them before. And speaking of Carney's PhD, he's been accused of plagiarism in his 1995 Oxford doctoral thesis. This is a story that's been picked up across Canada and in England. Now, the accusations are not just from random people, they're from other academics. Now, we'll see where this goes because, quite honestly, there's nothing that can really be done from here. It would require an investigation by Oxford, and the chances are that's going to come well after the election is over. This is just either reinforcing your biases, if you believe that Carney just steals a lot of things, policy included, or it's just a throwaway story that doesn't really matter. Now, in my opinion, this is not going to affect the polls in any way whatsoever. It's more of a reinforcing story for the people that are already voting against him. Now, Pierre did have a relatively good week. He has had massive crowds everywhere he has gone. It really shows just how insane this election is. In any other time, the Conservatives would be polling at a majority level, or at the very least a strong minority. But it's not enough because the left has united. So when you look at things like this, just remind yourself that in any other time, this would be the result of a majority or a strong minority conservative government, and that it is not a result of anything the Conservatives are doing as to why they are down in the polls. It is simply because the NDP has completely collapsed. Now, I'm not going to play this because it's going to be a bit too long, but I'll link it in the description. In the Surrey rally that he had, he committed to repealing and ending the gun bans, repealing C5 and C75, and focusing on actual criminal activity, not unlicensed sport shooters. And he spoke about it very well in the way that we want him to speak about it. So if you are curious, go take a look at this. This will probably also be part of my video whenever all the platforms come out and I talk about the firearm aspects of every party's platform. But again, I have to wait for that. So that is the end of the first week. I think there is one major takeaway that you need to look at for this story, and that is most of the stories and hit pieces that you see come out over the next 3 weeks are not going to matter. Yes, Carney's French is bad. Yes, he doesn't really know much about Canada in the time that he wasn't here. Yes, the Conservatives have very large rallies. And yes, hit pieces like the plagiarism accusations are bad, but they're not bad enough to swing any votes in this kind of election. Trump and the cost of living are far more important to Canadians this election. And so if there are going to be any votes changing, it's going to be based off of that. The only exception is the French debates, where we could actually see Carney's French hurt him. But we don't really know because this election is very different from previous elections. Polls can still change. There is still lots of time in this election for things to change. Don't forget that in 1984, which is very close to this kind of election, Turner was still well up in the polls until the debates happened. So things can change. Don't lose hope completely. And of course, always still vote. Don't feel like your vote is worthless. If you want a change in government, you have to vote for the change in government. So that is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day.